In the vast, rugged landscape of medieval Europe, winter was not merely a season. It was a force that shaped lives, dictated rhythms, and often tested the limits of human endurance. As the first cold winds swept across the fields, people of the Middle Ages braced themselves for months that could bring hunger, sickness, isolation, and, for many, the greatest challenge of the year, survival. Life in winter was a delicate balance between preparation and hope, between the stores gathered during the warmer months and the willpower to endure the long, dark nights that seemed to stretch endlessly across villages, forests, and farmlands. For the medieval farmer, the approach of winter began long before the first snowfall. The true battle started in late summer and autumn, when harvesting crops became a race against time. Wheat, barley, rye, and oats were gathered and stored inside granaries, sealed tightly against dampness and rodents. Every household, whether a humble peasant's hut or the manor of a wealthy landowner, depended on this supply. Without enough grain, bread, the foundation of the medieval diet, would run out, and hunger would follow. The autumn months were filled with urgency, salting meats, drying beans, preparing root cellars, and storing apples, onions, and cabbage in cool, dark spaces designed to last through the freeze. The memory of previous hard winters lingered in the minds of villagers, where stories of families who starved or froze strengthened the importance of preparation. When winter finally settled in, life slowed but never fully stopped. Despite the cold, people continued to work because necessity dictated it. Livestock still needed feeding, especially cattle, pigs, goats, and sheep that were housed close to family living quarters. Barns were often attached to the main home so that the animals' body heat could help warm the interior. Inside humble peasant cottages, fires burned constantly in the hearth, sometimes the only source of heat, light, and comfort. Yet even with a steady fire, temperatures indoors often remained barely above freezing. Windows were small and covered with animal skins or wooden shutters, and drafts slipped through every cracked beam and stone joint. Blankets were rare luxuries. Most slept wrapped in woolen layers, sometimes in the same clothes they wore during the day, lying close together for warmth. Families, including children and the elderly, depended on shared body heat. Food during winter became repetitive, simple, and often insufficient. The fresh vegetables and fruits of summer were long gone, replaced by salted pork, smoked fish, and coarse loaves of dark bread. Pottage, a thick stew of grains, dried peas, and whatever preserved ingredients could be added, became the daily meal for millions across Europe. If the harvest had been poor, pots grew thinner, and hunger became a familiar presence at the dinner table. Noble families fared better, eating venison, cured meats, aged cheeses, and imported wine. But even their supplies were not limitless, and harsh winters could test the wealthiest estates. Food was precious, carefully rationed to stretch through the coldest months. Every bite carried the weight of hope that the supplies would last until spring. The cold also brought illness. Dampness, smoke from indoor fires, and close living quarters encouraged the spread of respiratory diseases. Pneumonia, fevers, and infections were common, and without modern medicine, even minor sicknesses could become deadly. Winter meant less sunlight, and many suffered from fatigue and low spirits, something medieval people may not have understood scientifically, but recognized through experience. Religious explanations often filled the gaps in knowledge. Some believed winter hardships were divine tests of patience and faith. Others saw them as reminders of humanity's dependence on the rhythms of nature. Travel in winter was a dangerous undertaking. Roads became muddy, frozen, or buried under snow. Villages grew isolated, cut off from markets and distant relatives. Most people rarely traveled far even in summer, but winter further restricted human movement. Traders, messengers, and pilgrims who still attempted journeys had to navigate forests where wolves roamed freely, especially when food was scarce. Wolves, though not the constant threat sometimes depicted in legends, were opportunistic hunters, and harsh winters increased encounters near villages and livestock pens. People fortified barns, lit torches, and kept watch for predators desperate enough to approach human settlements. Craftsmen and artisans also felt the weight of winter differently. While farmers spent much of the cold months tending to animals and repairing tools, blacksmiths, carpenters, weavers, and shoemakers continued their trades indoors. Winter, paradoxically, could be a productive time for certain industries. With agricultural duties reduced, men and women turned to creating clothing, mending equipment, carving wooden utensils, tanning hides, and weaving wool into garments thick enough to resist the chill. Wool production was particularly important. Half of Europe depended on this material for warmth. Spinning wheels, looms, and knitting needles became the heartbeat of many homes during the colder months. Communal life also took on new meaning during winter. In many villages, the hearth became a social center, a place where families gathered to share warmth, stories, and songs. Oral traditions flourished during the long nights. Legends, folk tales, and myths passed from elders to children, preserving culture in a time when few could read or write. Religious festivals, such as Christmas, offered brief moments of joy, celebration, and feasting. Churches were hubs of community during winter, offering spiritual reassurance against the fears brought by cold and scarcity. The communal bonds forged or strengthened during winter played a crucial role in emotional survival, reminding people that they faced the challenges not alone, but as part of a larger whole. In more isolated castles and fortresses, winter was both a physical and strategic concern. Lords ensured that their granaries, armories, and wine cellars were fully stocked before the season began. Soldiers manned walls, maintaining vigilance against threats, even when snow made travel difficult. Winter campaigns were rare but not unheard of. Hunger could weaken defenses, and rival factions sometimes used the cold as a weapon. The logistics of feeding dozens or hundreds of people inside a stone fortress were immense. Fires burned in great halls where retainers, guards, and servants gathered, yet even thick stone walls trapped little warmth. The cold seeped through everything. Bedrooms were frigid, and many slept with braziers burning nearby, though this carried risks of smoke inhalation or fire. Housing across the Middle Ages varied widely, but almost all shared one trait: insulation was poor. Peasants lived in timber or wattle and daub homes with thatched roofs, while wealthier nobles resided in stone structures that retained cold more efficiently than heat. People relied on layered clothing, straw bedding, and animal furs to endure the worst nights. Some villages practiced communal sleeping arrangements for the elderly or sick, placing them near the hearth, where the fire rarely died. For children, winter was a mixture of hardship and wonder. They helped with chores, gathered firewood, and endured the same cold as the adults. But they also played in the snow, carved toys from spare wood, and listened with fascination to the tales told by their elders. Dietary changes also shaped winter health. Without fresh produce, vitamin deficiencies such as scurvy could emerge, although many rural communities unknowingly protected themselves through fermented foods, preserved berries, and herbal remedies passed down through generations. Herbs like sage, rosemary, thyme, and garlic were prized not just for flavor, but for their medicinal properties. Warm drinks, often made from mulled ale or broth, provided comfort and nourishment. The warmth from these drinks offered psychological relief, even if they provided only modest physical protection from the cold. One of the most significant challenges of medieval winter was fuel. Firewood was essential for heating, cooking, and maintaining daily life. Villages carefully managed woodland resources, as overharvesting could lead to shortages that took years to recover. Gathering firewood was a constant activity, with families sending children and adults alike into the surrounding forests to collect fallen branches or chop trees. Charcoal burners operated even during winter, producing a more efficient fuel for blacksmiths and other craftsmen. In regions where wood was scarce, people burned peat, dried dung, or straw, materials that provided far less heat and filled homes with thick, choking smoke. As the winter months dragged on, the psychological toll grew heavier. With nights stretching over 14 hours in some regions, darkness dominated daily life. People woke in the cold, worked in dim light, and returned to bed long before the next sunrise. The boundary between day and night blurred. Sleep patterns followed segmented rhythms, with families often sleeping in two distinct phases, waking for an hour or two in the middle of the night to stoke the fire, pray, or talk quietly before returning to their beds. This pattern, common across Europe, reflected a world shaped by natural cycles rather than artificial light. Yet medieval people were resilient. Winter was harsh, but it was also expected. Generations had lived under the same conditions, and through trial, error, and tradition, they developed the knowledge and customs necessary to endure. The arrival of late winter and early spring, when supplies were at their lowest and sickness at its peak, was often the most dangerous period. But once the first signs of thaw appeared, hope returned.
Snow melted, revealing fields ready for plowing. Rivers swelled with fresh water. Birds returned to their nesting grounds. The smell of earth, renewed and welcoming, signaled that life was beginning its cycle again. For the people of the Middle Ages, winter was a season defined by patience, discipline, and faith. It demanded respect and preparation, and those who succeeded in surviving it emerged stronger, more grateful for the warmth of spring, and more aware of the fragile balance between humanity and nature. Their daily choices, from how they stored food to how they built their homes, reflected a world where survival depended on community, tradition, and the quiet resilience formed in the heart of the coldest months. It was a life far removed from the comforts of the modern world, yet it shaped centuries of culture and memory, reminding us how deeply the human spirit can endure when faced with the trials of nature. As winter loosened its grip only slightly in late February or early March, medieval communities experienced what many historians call the hungry gap, a fragile, uncertain period when the food stored since autumn was nearly depleted, while the new agricultural cycle had not yet begun to produce anything edible. This narrow window between scarcity and renewal was often the most dangerous time of year. Granaries echoed with emptiness, salted meat barrels scraped the bottom, and families stretched the last handfuls of oats or beans as far as they could. Even noble estates, though far more secure than peasant cottages, carefully measured remaining supplies, aware that any unexpected setback, an illness among livestock, a broken millstone, an early thaw that turned roads into impassable mud, could threaten the entire household. During this time, every village relied heavily on communal cooperation. The medieval world was deeply interdependent. Survival depended less on individual strength and more on the combined resilience of the community. Skilled millers, blacksmiths, and carpenters were essential year-round, but never more so than in winter, when equipment failures or shortages could quickly turn catastrophic. If the village mill froze, bread production halted. If the iron plowshares broke and could not be repaired before spring, planting would be delayed, endangering next year's harvest before it even began. And if illness swept through a family, neighbors stepped in to help, understanding that the stability of one household was tied to the survival of all. Winter rituals, superstitions, and beliefs also played an important role in medieval psychology. People sought meaning in the cold and the suffering it brought. Some regions held small local festivals or observances intended to ward off misfortune or celebrate the slow return of sunlight. Torches or bonfires were lit during specific nights, symbolizing the triumph of light over darkness. In Christian Europe, prayers, blessings, and fasts intertwined with older pagan traditions still lingering beneath the surface, forming a cultural mosaic that shaped how people interpreted the passing of time. These rituals were not mere entertainment. They provided structure, emotional comfort, and a sense of control over forces far beyond human influence. Craftsmanship and domestic work intensified as people attempted to use every hour of winter wisely. Women and men together prepared tools for the coming spring, rethatching damaged roofs, repairing wooden fences, sharpening scythes and sickles, and inspecting plow frames for rot. Looms clacked rhythmically in many homes, weaving wool into new garments or repairing old ones that had worn thin. Leather workers stitched sheepskin boots and mittens. Potters inspected storage jars for cracks that might compromise precious supplies. The winter months, though difficult, offered time to invest in these long-term necessities, shaping the success of the agricultural year ahead. Yet for all the planning and resilience, winter remained unpredictable. Some years were mild, with brief snowfalls and manageable cold. Others brought weeks of blizzards, frozen rivers that halted trade, or storms that collapsed roofs across entire villages. A bitter winter could alter political landscapes as well. Kings and lords reconsidered military strategies depending on weather patterns. A harsh winter might delay a planned campaign, while an unusually mild one could embolden armies to travel earlier than expected. Soldiers, too, experienced winter's cruelty firsthand. Leather armor stiffened in the cold, metal helmets chilled the skin, and frostbite was a constant threat. For armies forced to winter in the field, morale often hovered between endurance and collapse.
One of the most overlooked aspects of medieval winter life was the role of monasteries and religious communities. These institutions served as centers of knowledge, charity, and limited medical care. During the coldest months, monasteries distributed bread, soup, or ale to the poorest villagers, offering a safety net that helped prevent widespread despair. Monks and nuns tended herb gardens protected beneath simple shelters, cultivating plants like mint, sage, and feverfew, ingredients used to treat winter ailments such as colds, fevers, or digestive troubles. They copied manuscripts by candlelight, preserving knowledge across generations despite the season's hardships. In the countryside, hunters took to the forests in search of game, though success varied greatly depending on local wildlife populations and winter severity. Deer, wild boar, hares, and birds provided valuable fresh meat when available, but hunting was often restricted by law, especially for common peasants. Nobles zealously guarded their hunting rights, and poachers faced harsh penalties. Still, desperation sometimes drove peasants to risk the wrath of their lord for the sake of feeding their families. The forest, while offering resources, also posed dangers: wolves, bitter cold, thin ice on frozen streams, and the disorientation brought by heavy snowfall. Another essential survival strategy was fuel management. Fire was the core of winter life, vital for cooking, heating, and warding off illness. Every household rationed its firewood carefully. Large logs were saved for nighttime warmth, while smaller branches and brushwood were used during the day. In regions where wood was scarce, people relied on peat bricks, which burned slowly but emitted a dense smoke that filled homes with an acrid haze. Some families burned dried animal dung, particularly in pastoral communities where cattle or horses were plentiful. The smell was unpleasant, the heat modest, but the alternative was freezing. Water, often taken for granted in warmer months, became a logistical challenge in winter. Wells could freeze, rivers became dangerous, and snow had to be melted carefully to avoid contamination. Many medieval households stored water in clay jars or wooden barrels indoors, close to the hearth where it remained usable. Bathing was infrequent throughout the Middle Ages, but winter made it even rarer. Maintaining personal hygiene became difficult, and illnesses often spread more easily as a result. Still, medieval people were not oblivious to cleanliness. They improvised with herbs, cloths dipped in warm water, and simple grooming tools like combs or scrapers. Throughout the harshest months, communities leaned heavily on oral knowledge, wisdom passed from generation to generation. Elderly villagers, unable to perform heavy labor, played vital roles as storytellers, advisors, and caretakers of tradition. They taught others how to recognize signs of weather changes, how to treat frostbite, how to stretch limited supplies, and which foods preserved best under certain conditions. Their accumulated experience could mean the difference between survival and disaster. The psychological dimension of medieval winter cannot be overstated. People lived with constant uncertainty. A sudden illness, a failed batch of bread, a broken roof beam, or a lost animal could spiral into catastrophe. Without the safety nets of modern society, risk was woven into everyday life. And yet, medieval Europeans developed remarkable resilience, shaped not by choice but by necessity. Winter taught patience, community, humility, and a deep awareness of nature's power. These values permeated art, religion, storytelling, and social customs. As spring approached at last, often hesitantly, with late frosts and sudden storms, villages stirred with renewed determination. The first crocuses or snowdrops blooming along the forest edge signaled a promise. The most difficult season had passed. Farmers prepared their fields, plowing deep furrows into soil still cold but workable. Young animals were born in barns, their arrival symbolizing hope and continuity. Rivers thawed, trade routes reopened, and marketplaces came alive with movement after months of silence. For many, the first true spring day felt like awakening from a long, collective sleep. Yet even as warmth returned, winter left lasting marks. Roofs needed repair, tools needed sharpening, and food stores were often depleted to a frightening degree. Families reflected on the lessons learned, what they should store differently next year, how they could improve insulation, whether they should gather more firewood or plant more beans. Medieval life was cyclical, and winter shaped the rhythm of that cycle more than any other season. Every challenge became part of the community's collective memory. Winter also influenced medieval culture and creativity. The long nights encouraged storytelling and the development of myths, some of which still echo in modern folklore.
Tales of spirits wandering snowy fields, guardians who protected hearth fires, or beasts lurking beyond the village lights. These stories served practical purposes, teaching children to avoid dangerous places, reinforcing social norms, or providing warnings about the natural world. But they also offered escape and imagination during months when the real world felt particularly harsh. In towns and larger cities, winter created a different set of challenges and opportunities. Markets shrank, outdoor labor decreased, and many trades slowed. But indoor professions, scribes, tailors, candle makers, cobblers, bakers, continued quietly. City dwellers relied on merchants who stored goods imported months earlier, and prices often rose sharply as supplies dwindled. Fires posed a greater threat in crowded urban environments, where wooden buildings stood close together. A single spark from an unattended hearth could destroy dozens of homes. As a result, city authorities enforced strict rules regarding chimneys, night curfews, and fire watch patrols. Despite the hardships, winter provided moments of beauty and camaraderie. Children playing in fresh snowfall, families gathering around the hearth to share stories, and communities coming together for seasonal feasts all revealed the human capacity to find warmth amid cold. Medieval winter was not solely an era of suffering. It was also a season of shared identity, reflection, and unity. People did not simply endure winter. In many ways, winter shaped who they were. For medieval Europeans, survival depended on understanding that nature was an unbreakable force. The cold did not negotiate. Food did not magically replenish. And yet, generation after generation met the season with preparation, discipline, and quiet strength. They learned to interpret the sky, the wind, the migration of birds, the way frost formed on thatched roofs. Knowledge was passed through lullabies, prayers, and practical instructions whispered in barns or murmured beside fires. This intimate relationship with winter forged communities that were hardy, adaptive, and deeply connected to the land. Every spring felt earned. Every harvest felt like the repayment of a debt owed to long months of caution and endurance. Medieval winter was a test, one that demanded not just physical toughness, but wisdom, cooperation, and profound respect for the world's natural rhythms. In the end, the medieval experience of winter reminds us how fragile human life once was, and how remarkable it is that communities across Europe survived, despite the constant threats of cold, hunger, and disease. Their resilience formed the foundation of European society for centuries. Their traditions, stories, and survival strategies echo faintly in our modern world, where winter is often softened by technology, but still holds a quiet symbolic power. The people of the Middle Ages did not simply live through winter. They carried its lessons into their hearts, year after year, generation after generation, shaping a world built on endurance, memory, and an unwavering will to survive. And so, as the final snows melted and the first green blades pushed through the thawing earth, the people of the Middle Ages emerged from winter not only alive, but fortified by the very struggle that defined their world, reminded once more that survival itself was their greatest triumph. And if you enjoyed this journey through the harsh winters of the Middle Ages, don't forget to check out the channel, leave a like, and subscribe for more videos like this.